Ladies and gentlemen and assembled company, welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe and our weekly Connecting the World by Stories or by story singular. And tonight we are having stories and poems of displacement. And that's particularly appropriate, I think, at this time of year when everyone all over the world is celebrating different winter festivals. And we're also trying to deal with enormous quantities of people around the world in a state of displacement. So we can be reminded. But right now, someone who actually has examined this and used as a creative. I've got people in the room making fun of my hand movements. Right. Without further ado, please welcome Parona.
Thank you. I like the hand movements. Right, so I'm going to talk about displacement, and that's something that I've been working with and on for a very long time, although I have a wonderful home myself. But I started writing this book, Nomad's Land, about 2.5 years ago. But as I was writing it, it became more and more urgent. As in many parts of the world where people are being displaced, the lockdown in India led to huge displacement of migrants who had lost their jobs. They came from villages, a lot of them completely unlettered, and they couldn't pay their rent anymore because there was no work, and they couldn't afford transport home. And in any case, in the lockdown, buses and trains and everything had stopped. And so they didn't know the way home. And I thought, what a tragic thing to be in a place where you can't find home. And they started to walk along railway tracks because they knew that if you take a train from this station and you just follow the railway tracks and walk on the tracks and don't leave them, because if you leave the tracks, you'll be lost in this huge country of India. And they started walking on these tracks, thousands of miles, and on the tracks because they were too frightened to leave the tracks. And one night, the train started up and they didn't know. And a whole lot of migrants were actually run over by the train, by the engine driver who never saw them, sleeping there on the tracks. And so this book of mine, Nomad's Land, if you are a nomad, where do you belong? If you never had a home, you never had a place to call your own, then where do you belong? And can you be displaced if you never had a place in the first place? These are the kind of questions that drove Nomad's Land. And I'm going to read a little bit from, it's divided into three parts. This book, I'm going to read to you a little bit from the 3 parts of the book. Mountain girls. Mountain girls, children of forever skies and endless horizons. They are fed on yesterday's dreams and stories, told and retold endlessly by their elders. These dreams color their thoughts, guide their paths, even though these dreams are not their own, for their own dreams have not been fed by memories of homelands and yesterdays that they have never seen, that they no longer have a connect with. And that's the point. When adults and elders are displaced, they hark back to what was. But children don't go backwards. Children must necessarily, almost by definition, move forwards. And if you're never made to feel that your present is your home, then where do you belong if you've never seen the yesterday where your parents live? Their dreams are made up of a fight with a friend, the food they wanted to eat, the film they dreamt of acting in, the boy they wanted to talk to. Their dreams are not of the world that their families have left behind. Yes, these were girls of forever skies and endless horizons. But that was very long ago. One of the girls remembered it. She had seen some of it. And one of them had never seen it at all because her family had been displaced. Her people, her entire tribe of the Khushavans had been displaced before she was born. So where does little Pema belong? This is a story of two girls, Shana, who comes from the north of India, Kashmir, where the Hindu community, the Kashmiri Pandits, were driven out with a lot of violence, and the Muslims remained behind. And so both parties have a lot of resentment against each other, one for leaving and one for being made to leave. The other girl, Pema, I wondered when I was writing the book, I thought I would start out writing about the Tibetans who were driven out when China invaded Tibet. But the more I was studying displacement, the more I realized this is, as John gave me the word today, it's an everyman story. Not every man, maybe not you and me, maybe not many in the world, but every man of displaced people. And so I made up a tribe. I made up a tribe called the Khushavans, who come from the high Himalayan plateaus, who have been disbanded and driven out because they followed their own rules, and city dwellers couldn't fathom it, couldn't understand it, and they felt that everyone must have the same documents, everyone must set down roots or be identifiable in one place. And yet no one was willing to sell them land. Nobody wanted them as neighbors. Nobody wanted these children in their schools, in their children's schools, because you never know what they're going to teach. They're bad people because they're an unknown people. So where do they go? And that's the whole point of displacement, isn't it? And Shana protested sometimes. We can't live in mourning forever. But her words were met with silent disapproval. Or her mother's favorite line, you'll never understand. And Shana wanted to rage back, yes, you're right, I'll never understand. How can I? But she didn't, not out loud. She knew that her mother was going to be in loss and mourning forever. And before they left Kashmir, as Shana continued to go to school, as even her father kept saying, nothing will happen. These are our friends. No one's going to drive us away. But Shana's people, Shana's community were all leaving and fleeing. Busload upon busload was going. And in school, more and more desks began to empty. And Shana, for the first time, began to feel that she was different, that she didn't really belong in this place, which was the only place that had ever been home. The lines, once invisible, began to show up, and cracks began to deepen. And then something does happen. Shana's father is killed, he is attacked, and he's killed, and they flee. They're one of the last to flee from their community. And as the bus is going, Shana's best friend is running, racing towards the bus for one last hug, for one last goodbye. But Shana turns away. And as the bus rounds the last bend, meaning that they have left the valley forever, a wail goes up, a cry goes up, and people are weeping. But Shana holds herself in. This place doesn't deserve her tears. And then there's Pema. Shireen. Now what happens is that Pema, and of course I'm skipping through bits of the chunks of the novel. So Pema and Shana are sent to a school. They don't know each other. First time they've met on a bus sitting next to each other. Shireen, another girl, has taken Pema under her wing, and she's introduced her to all the kids around. So you don't have to worry about falling in with the wrong crowd, she said. She'd taken her to the various dorms of the boarding school, showing her around the place. When Pema met everyone, she felt like she was an outsider. Not that they were mean or anything, just that she really had nothing in common with them. When they were chatting about things, there was nothing she could add to the conversation. And none of them asked where she was from. Pema had come prepared with loads of answers about her new home, about her tribe, their escape from persecution, of how they had walked miles over mountains, how they had found a new home, how her people loved animals, and where humans belonged to dogs and cattle. But no one asked her anything, not beyond her name. No one asked her where she'd got such an unusual name from, for none had a name like hers. Only a couple of them touched her hair and said she was so lucky to have such beautiful shiny hair. Someone asked what conditioner she used. But as Pema started to reply about the resin from trees that the elders made and sold in traditional medicine stores, the person who had asked had turned away. When she stood on the outside of the circle of chatty girls, it occurred to Pema that she hadn't seen Shana since she had got off the bus. No one noticed as she slipped away from the crowd and went looking for her. Was it her friend? She didn't even know whether this was her friend. And then skip ahead, way ahead, to Pema and Shana become very close friends. They also discover that both their grandparents and all the elders of their community, now living in the city in the plains, have developed very bad chest infections and coughs, which are not being cured, because the elders are not used to the pollution of the city. They're not used to the medicines that doctors here are prescribing. And they decide that they're going to go back into the mountains and try and get the traditional medicine and maybe become traditional medicinal doctors when they grow up. They've grown up a little bit. Shana called for a family meeting. She summoned up all her courage. She knew that her grandmother's heart was hard and cold and shut against that place that was once home. She had talked with Pema and was amazed that Pema had been given permission to go into this unknown land, known only by stories of violence and death. And she, who came from Kashmir, was being so stubbornly refused. Fine, she said to herself, I can be stubborn too. She made her mother and grandparents sit down, and she made noon chai, the salt tea that would bring back memories of home. Her mother was in on the secret, but she had promised her daughter not to speak. And Pema began, I'm tired of living with hate, with the memory of hate. I hated for a while. Yes, I hated those who I was told to hate, but I'm done with it. If you were to come to my school and meet the girls there, you'd end up seeing my point too. There are groups of girls who hate other girls, although they look the same, they speak almost the same, they dress the same, they laugh at the same jokes. But one group has been told to hate the other, and the other group has been told to hate this one. For no real reason. It's just that they've been told to hate. They won't be friends with each other, won't eat food that comes from the other group's home. If a girl from one group has a birthday and is distributing sweets, the other girls won't touch it. They'll snigger behind their hands. But still, they follow hate as though it's a religion. Hate is not a religion. Don't you think it's time to hate? Don't you think it's time to stop hate and change? Hate grows when we feed it. And we children, we have no cause to hate. Think of it. A baby is not born with hate. Where does the child learn? There was a long silence. Shana waited, and finally she said, I'm going back. I am going to go back. And silence descends. But she does go. And again, I'm skipping. As the plane touches down and the girls disembark, Pema grabs Shana's arm, pointing upwards with her free hand. It's true. It's really true. There are forever skies here. Right outside, Huma, who had once been Shana's friend, the one who had run after the bus. Huma is standing, shifting one foot to the other, the way Shana knows she does when she's nervous. But as soon as she sees her long-lost friend, she bursts into tears and buries her face. Dropping her bags, Shana runs to her, and they're weeping, hugging, holding on to each other, as though they had never let go. Pema stands awkwardly to one side, waiting for them to come back from this emotional reunion. From all that Shana has told her about how they left, Pema is almost surprised at how warmly they accept her back. And Pema feels a pang in her heart. She's never going to know this kind of acceptance, this kind of homecoming. There is no one left where she comes from to wrap their arms around her. No one left to cry with relief to see her back where she belongs. Where do I belong? Pema answers, feeling almost jealous of the scene in front of her.
Ah,
thank you.
You are such a right. Now there's a couple of things about the book. One, in every Wednesday, or I think we're starting the second Wednesday in January. I can't remember what we said, but we're going to have a serialized version of the book on the cafe that Paro's coming on every Wednesday through January, or most of January. And but if you want to buy the book, which is kind of why writers write, got a Paro Anand on, just look it up on Google, and the book is Nomad's Land.
Nomad's Land.
Nomad's Land. And apparently you can buy it on the Unmentionable, you know, that big river that flows through South America. And but actually manages to get a lot of good stuff to us. But that was a wonderful start to the program, and there's only one place to go after that, and that's to Rain for a couple of poems. Rain, welcome.
Hello. Hello, John.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you. Yes, that was interesting, Para. Themes of belonging, displacement. For centuries, Roman gypsies have been displaced, and that goes right across the world, no matter where they're from. And still now, the idea of gypsies being moved on is all around us. So I have two poems. The first one is called Chickens in a Pen, and it's about the times when the Romany travellers were forced off the road. Chickens in a pen. They drove us off the Toba, we settled in a ken. The Chavis didn't like it, like chickens in a pen. They drove us off the Toba, you've never seen the like. We couldn't hear the cuckoo sing or light the yog at night. They drove us off the Toba, the politicians had their say. We're gypsies through and through, watch us rise, we'll have our day. They drove us off the Toba, we've settled in a ken. The Chavis, they don't like it, like chickens in a pen. And the second piece is, thank you, and the second piece is going back in the 50s and 60s, there was a big sort of surge from the government to get gypsy travellers off of the roads in the UK. And, you know, they would turn up any time of the day or night. Sometimes the mothers would be feeding the children. Sometimes they'd be cooking, but they were still moved on. And often the policemen would be quite brutal with them. And this is based on true facts, true story. It's called Keep Moving. The last weekend in May, a Friday, we pulled up on the poove. We got the fire going and washed the little chavvies ready for bed. Our Raya and me were drinking mesky when our Sammy shouted, "Dick Eye, the gathers are coming." All the malts came out of the Vardas and we stood there. We had to hold the men back as the gathers started to wreck the sight. One of them kicked the kettle off the yog. He shouted, "Pack up and get going. You're not welcome here." I had to hold my Alfie back. He don't lose his temper much, but when he does, watch out. Like the time he snoped a gyro in the yacht outside the beer shop and ended up in the cells for a night. It rained hard. We got drenched as we packed up all our covers. The chavvies were crying, the men swearing under their breath, knowing if they said anything, they get carted off. Our Tilda was moaning about not getting sushi stew. Us malts started to sing. I'm a Romany Rye, a true Didikai. I build all my castles beneath the blue sky. I live in a tent, I don't pay no rent, and that's where they call me a Romany Rye. As the men untied the horses, me and Raya cleared up the rubbish. I heard the gather say, "Bleeding jippos." My Alfie called out, "The gathers are grunts, let's gel on, keep moving." We kept moving, but sometimes we stayed put for a while, like when we was op picking or pea picking. I'm a Romany Rom, I travel the drum, I hawk all the day and I dance through the night. I'll never grow rich, I was born in a ditch, and that's why they call me a Romany Rye. All together in the poove, the best of times, thank the blessed Lord. Thank you.
Thank you, Rain. That's now, are those in a book?
Yes. Here we go. Apple Water Povel Pani.
What's it called?
It's called Apple Water Povel Pani.
Apple Water Povel Pani. And where can people get that?
Well, they can just contact me on Facebook and go onto my website. My other book is called They Lit Fires, Lenti Hacho Yog. So they're both published by Hedgehog Poetry Press, and they've been selling well over the last 2 years. So I'm very pleased with that. And
so they should. So they should.
All of the poems, there's pictures of the hop fields, of my granny, my grandfather, of my great granny, all in the books.
Whoa. So far, 2 amazing authors. One novelist, one poet. So there's so I'm going. So Rain, for those that are listening elsewhere and can't see Rain's name on the bottom, it's now I'm going to get this pronunciation. I've asked you a million times, but it's Gorgon. How close? How close? Or
Nearly there, John. It's Rain Gagan.
Gagan. It's much simpler. I knew I was putting an extra syllable in there, and I couldn't work out which was the extra one. Rain Gagan, but spelt, for those that are trying to write it, make their notes, Geoghegan.
That's right.
And why would I have trouble breaking that down to 2 syllables? I haven't the faintest idea.
Don't worry.
But there's no, but the important thing, get our books.
Thank you, John.
And Yuliu, we'll go to we unfortunately Gail couldn't get Gail Ross. She's in the middle of Cherokee Nation and couldn't get to us live tonight. But so she's given us permission to reuse one of her stories that she did earlier in lockdown for us, and it fits totally into tonight's. It's a story of the Trail of Tears. So Yuliu, are we ready? Thank you.
Probably the most important event that we are remembered for, the Cherokee, was that terrible forced removal from our mountain homelands. And like many native tribes, Cherokees have taken that history and woven it into a told story so that it will never be forgotten. I learned this story from one of our Eastern Band Cherokee brothers. The small group of Cherokees who were not removed up in the mountain fastness of North Carolina, they are still there. And of course, they are a federally recognized tribal nation in their own right. So this is a story I learned out east. In May of 1838, the storm that had been for so long gathering broke over the Cherokee Nation. Indian removal, the brainchild of Thomas Jefferson, but the architect was Andrew Jackson. Jackson had made his military reputation that launched him into the presidency on the backs of Indian people, Cherokees, Choctaws, fighting with him, first in the war against the Red Stick Creeks, and then again in the War of 1812. But Jackson, he knew the people of the southeastern states, and he knew they coveted our land. And so right after he was elected, he passed a law called the Indian Removal Bill. calling for all 5 of the southeastern tribes, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Seminole, the Creek, to sign treaties, give up their homelands, and move west beyond the Mississippi. And one by one, our neighbors, they gave Jackson a treaty. And one by one, they left. But the Cherokees refused. In the beginning days of the United States, George Washington and then Thomas Jefferson held out an olive branch to Native peoples, saying, "Live more like we do." And the Cherokees accepted the challenge, and their country was transformed. Instead of the traditional village agriculture, great farms and plantations, businesses. There was a Cherokee newspaper using the brilliant syllabary, a way of writing in the Cherokee language that was developed by Sequoyah. And so by the time Andrew Jackson came into office and my great-great-great-grandfather, John Ross, was elected principal chief, the Cherokee Nation was a shining and prosperous land that was coveted by our neighbors in Georgia. You see, Georgia claimed a part of what was our nation for her own. And she was eager for a removal treaty to be signed with the Cherokees. Georgia passed a series of very restrictive laws claiming they applied to us in our own country. No Cherokee could own a gun. No Cherokee could testify in a court. All of these laws meant to dissolve our national identity. And there was horrible violence. Georgia pony soldiers riding across the border at night, beating Cherokee men, raping Cherokee women, burning Cherokee homes. And the Cherokees, they fought back. They didn't go to war, they went to court. And in a landmark Supreme Court decision, the court found on behalf of the Cherokee. The Cherokee are a domestic dependent nation with a government of their own, with an economy of their own, with borders of their own, and Georgia has no power over them. Whereupon Andrew Jackson became the only president in the history of the United States to openly defy the Supreme Court. He is said to have remarked, John Marshall has made his decision as Chief of the Supreme Court, Chief Justice. To the Georgians, he said, light a fire under them. They'll move. And so with the federal government refusing to uphold the terms of our treaties, the Georgian violence increased until finally one small faction of the Cherokees, they gave in. And they signed the treaty that Jackson wanted, the Treaty of Nuechota, signed on December 29th, 1835. The Cherokees protested that the treaty was a fraud. It was not signed by any of the leaders who had the right to make such an agreement. But Jackson didn't care. He took it to the Senate, and there it was ratified by one vote. And when the grace period in the treaty had expired, and the Cherokees had still refused to move, The United States Army, led by General Winfield Scott, moved into Cherokee country, rounding up the families, herding them from their homes. All they were allowed to take was what they could carry on their backs. And they were herded into 7 great wooden stockades like cattle, and with inadequate food, inadequate water, inadequate sanitation, the people began to fall sick. And in June of 1838, the first detachment of Cherokees were taken from a stockade and sent on their way west. Now, they were originally supposed to go by the river route on flatboats, but it had been a spring and a summer of drought, and the rivers were dry. So they walked, following the rivers in the sickly season, the hot season, and weak from the months in the stockade, they began to die. First the very old, and then the very young. And after days and days of this torment, the hearts of the women broke. They walked as though they could see nothing ahead of them. They walked through the day, some of them carrying the bodies of their little ones because they refused to believe that they were gone. And when the end of the day came, they sat and they stared into a future too bleak to face. And the men, seeing their women, they became frightened, and so they gathered together and they went out in the night to pray. Unetlana, pity us, help us. The strength of the Cherokee people is the strength of our women. If they cannot survive, we will not survive. And they say that Creator took pity on those men and spoke to them, saying, in the morning, tell your women to look back at the trail they have watered with their tears. I will send them a sign. And so the next morning the men told the women what Creator had said, and they felt better. And they went about preparing for the day's march, and as they set foot on the trail, they looked behind them. And there, springing from the ground, were all these beautiful green vines weaving themselves together, stems with 7 leaves, one for each of the 7 clans of the Cherokee. And at the end of each of those stems, a beautiful little white flower. White, the Cherokee color for peace. But in the center of each of those flowers was a little circle of gold. So the Cherokees would never forget. It was greed that had taken them from their land. But seeing those beautiful little flowers growing back along the trail they had followed, springing from the earth, sprouting the leaves, bursting into bloom, the women remembered. As long as there is beauty in the world, there is hope. And so they found the strength to finish their journey. And Chief John Ross, horrified at the death toll mounting, he finally gave in. He went to General Winfield Scott and said, "Let the Cherokee manage their own removal. We will not go herded like a defeated people. We will move like the tribal nation that we are." And Winfield Scott agreed. And so the removal was halted through that summer while all things were made ready for them to undertake that journey. And the trail began again in September. But the worst winter ever recorded struck the Cherokees on the trail. And again, people began to die. But when we reached our new home, the Cherokees, as they had done so many times before, they rose from the ashes like the great bird, the phoenix. And once again, they stood tall. They stood proud. But we tell that story to remember the history and remember the most important thing. As long as there is beauty in the world, there is hope.
Oh. Oh. Baden, do you want to follow Gaia?
No, but man, that was harrowing. When did she do that?
She did that she recorded that for us quite early in the days of the cafe, sort of March time, early lockdown, March, April. But I've known Gail since the 90s, and I think I first met her on, she was spent a lot of time in Texas then, so I met her at folk festivals, and so with Roxy, who was a Native American activist, and so I've sat probably in a barn somewhere near Johnson City, I'm not sure, but kind of with sort of music and poetry and things. So I've known Gail for a while. Taken lockdown to reconnect, but that is such, she's such a great teller.
That's a harrowing tale. I mean, and her power that she brings to it was just stunning. Yeah, it's been a very mixed session so far, sort of an epic story of displacement across an entire continent, stories of the experiences of two sort of different peoples. Mine is going to be a much more personal piece, so I'm going to kind of bring it down from the epic to the personal. It's I don't even know what to describe it. It's really reflections on leaving. I'm actually a bit emotional from watching that, and also yeah, this is a really sort of quite a difficult time. But this piece is one that I wrote quite a long time ago, and it's sort of reflections on moving from the Caribbean to this part of the world, and it's about the sort of personal division between being a sort of black man from the Caribbean and then being a black man living in England. And I'm just going to read it, and you guys make of it what you will. It's called Colliding Worlds. Worlds collide in my rhymes. In my words, you can hear bass line drop in every style from dub-wise to hip-hop. Rhythms hitting without strain, leaving a sensation in your brain that's sweet, sweet like sensimilia, the thing that some call tampi, rolls all over you like some big fat mampi in the deepest, darkest corner of the dance. A fully dressed, stand-up, sweat-drenched romance. Worlds collide in my rhymes. I journeyed here from Caribbean small-town heat, narrow, sun-soaked streets, and now my stomach churns from this London city's stench. Unrelating concrete scenery relieved only by the sight of lovers trysting on a park bench. Hardcore love, urban style, but tender sensibilities bludgeoned into paranoia by this hard, cold landscape. Suddenly I wonder, have I just been an unsuspecting witness to a rape? Worlds collide. At times I create poetic soundscapes, abstract and surreal as anything by Brian Eno or David Hockney, but make no mistake, me is not no cockney. So forget both eel and pie and mash, forget Bex and posh. Me, I drown the sound of bowl bells with anything from a touch of jazz to music from soul rebels like Marley Spear and Peter Tosh, the ragamuffin rude boy Shabba, Mozart, Beethoven, or even ABBA. That's right. You can call me Mr. International Lover Man. Mi chica Latina assuages my deepest and basest urges. Basso profundo del estojillo del mundo, siempre primero, nunca segundo. But these same lips that run so free and loose with rhymes and verse, sweet like Julie mango or cane juice, can also curse in 4 languages fluently. Acid-tongued like sour lime or a sharp satsuma, quick to tell you about your mama, especially if you're a religious freak of whatever shape or hue, whether seraphim or cherubim, saved soul, Orthodox or Jew, singing songs of praise while waiting for nirvana, that thing I call the heavenly never never, standing impotently by and watching while the working class is forced to take it up like some reluctant batty. Well, I don't think you're clever. Forget you, your Harry, and inshallah, forever and ever. Amen. Worlds collide. Watch me ride with him, fearless, couldn't care less and bold, telling tales from days of old of crusaders riding out on rampant steeds, performing brave and dashing deeds, armed with flashing blades, bringing light onto dark and savage souls. But in the twist of a rhyme, those knights become knaves by whose foul deeds millions were enslaved, freedom ripped away, rites of passage sold. Many never lived again to greet the sight of day and perished in the hold. And you said chivalry ain't dead? Take a look inside my head. Worlds collide. My words provide a kaleidoscopic word bridge across the divided world inside, infinitely split. A literary Jekyll battling a lyrical Mr. Hyde. A 21st century schizoid man? Definitively. Or maybe, like that obeah-ridden bride driven by invisible slaps, I might be touched, but by divinity, perhaps. Worlds collide in my rhymes. Worlds collide in my rhymes.
Thank you, Baden. What a program we've had tonight. Now we after a program like that, it would be rude for us not to be able to talk to each other. So if we can unmute and ask questions, tell each other how wonderful we are, or whatever. But the floor is yours. Baden, that was fantastic.
Thanks. You can tell I'm a bit more mellow now than I was when I was writing.
How long ago was that when you wrote that?
God, I started about 2000. That's probably about 2002, 2003.
Wow.
And when I started writing poetry, I sort of fell in love with the fact that I could write long, extended pieces and sort of extend a metaphor or rhyme across 6, 8, 10 lines of poetry. I don't write like that anymore. I don't think that's a bad thing or a good thing.
I think our writing evolves. Sorry, David. Didn't quite get that, David.
I'm not sure.
You put something in the chat.
Are you putting it in the chat, David?
Are
you putting it in the chat?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I
Rain,
just
was
want
listening to. Oh, sorry, go on, Bob.
Oh, I was just going to say for the three of you that are there, this is just a really, really powerful. But for me, it's morning of telling, and it's really each in your own way. This is what makes this kind of narrative storytelling so powerful, because each of you is just it's an experience from your very granular, particular points of view and experience. It makes the whole, I sat in on a session where the theme was home recently, and it was a wonderful session. And not to knock the session, but a lot of it was all metaphorical. It was in our heads. It was ideas, and these experiences that you've related are just makes everything real. And I'm just really glad that I tuned in this morning. So thank you all. And of course, the story of the Trail of Tears. I live at the edge of Indian country here in New Mexico, and unfortunately, that's one of many similar stories.
I was going to
Rain, you were
ask.
about to say something.
Yeah, I was going to ask Rain. I noticed one I sort of loved, especially the second piece. I love that kind of image of the women kind of almost being that sort of barrier between what's happening to the encampment and the men, and the kind of holding them back from doing what they really wanted to do to protect their community, knowing what would happen to them and how much worse it would be if if they sort of yielded to the provocation. There's a lot of words, there's a lot of language that you use that I kept hearing. I think that's one of the reasons I'm going to get the book, to try and kind of get hold of some of the vocabulary.
Thank you. It's called Romanichal. It's English Romany. The word for language in Romany is jib. It's the Romany jib, the Romany language. And what we say is we rocker the Romany. We talk the Romany. And it's interesting you point out that idea of the women. Now, I come from a family of very strong women, And, you know, my granny was a force to be reckoned with. And in that piece the second piece that you talk about, that was sort of based on one of her experiences. Now, my mum was born in a wagon, so my mum didn't actually travel, although my mum did the hop picking. But going back to my granny and my great granny and grandfather, they would have been pulled off the roads, they would have been interrupted. And it was the women who sort of used their common sense to sort of check out what was going on and sort of instinctually know what to do. The men would often say they were the bosses, but actually it was the women. It was the women that were the bosses, probably with a lot of other communities. And that did come across in that piece, because, you know, I write a lot about the women in my family. They have a very strong voice, and it's something that I love to explore. And there's one particular piece I write about where they sit around the fire. It's in my second book called They Lit Fires, Lenti Hatch O Yog. And the idea that it's not just the men that sit around the fire and sort of have a smoke and have a whiskey, but the women do as well. You know, they sit around the fire, or they might go off and have their own little fire, but during that time, they're working out things, you know, what they're going to do the next day, you know, what do they need to be thinking about. So I'm really pleased, Baden, that you picked up on that, because during some of my live readings, women come up to me often and say, oh, you know, I really identify with some of the women in your family. They're very strong, aren't they? They're quite powerful, aren't they? And I say, yes, actually, they are. They're very powerful. I'm not saying that the men aren't powerful, but they're powerful in a different way. And often the Romany men, the Chows, would be more nurturing and more motherly sometimes than the mothers. The mothers would be more sort of, you know, politics, business, that sort of stuff. It's really interesting, that dynamic between them. So yes.
What really moved me was that a line of where if women lose hope, then where are you? Then you're lost. As a people, you're lost if the women lose hope.
Yes.
And for me, because I work by and large with children, I think that is very true as well. If children lose hope and cannot see their future, then how do we move forward from here? And David, thank you for your question. And how long did it take me to write this novel? Is your question? Yeah, it started cooking in my head when I was working with gypsy people in India. Many gypsy people actually see their roots in India. So this group of people called the Pardhis, who are gypsies, and so therefore they don't belong anywhere. And they became, during the British rule, became a deemed criminal tribe. That means it was assumed that these people were criminal and must be treated as such. And when I was working with these people, I found that I was working with children, and what we were trying to do is to get children into the mainstream, because they were basically working as poachers, or wildlife poachers, because they knew the forest so well. So when our thing was to try to get them into mainstream, because if they don't have any choice, then where they can only continue poaching, because that's the only thing they know. There was a lot of pushback by wildlife rights people, animal rights people, that we were actually aiding and abetting the poachers, which I don't, anyway, that's a whole political story. I won't go into that. What started out, David, at that time was this question that if you don't belong anywhere, then where are you? And I was struck when one child said, I'm homesick. And I thought, but where's home? He didn't have a home, yet he was homesick. And it was that which started it. So this was about 5 years ago that the story started to cook. And then it took me about 2.5, 3 years to write it.
Wow.
Well, one of the other things I liked is that there's a thread. I mean, I'm sure it isn't accidental that the key characters in Paro's book are basically two girls, two young women. And there's that whole thread that led from there to Rain's two pieces, and the second one in particular, and then that line of Gale's about when the men realize that if the women break, it's all over. I mean, I relate to that very strongly. I was brought up by my grandmother, who was was about 5'3". I think you know what that means. And she had 12 children.
Yeah.
The first 7 of whom were all boys.
Wow.
And she often said that she lived in a house full of men. And she had to be who she was in order to
Yeah.
survive that, you know. She was a bit special. So yeah, I get that. I really get that.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring the conversation to only. I'm not closing the session, but we have been joined by Colin Irwin, who has actually traveled 5,556 miles to be with us and rushed in and sort of turning on his computer as he belted through the door. So Colin, we've had stories, we've had poems. We had Gail Ross's story of the Trail of Tears, and I believe you had something for us. So let us put our hands together and welcome Colin.
Oh, thank you, John. John, have you got a camera in my house? You just described my entry into my house and onto this perfectly. You're muted, John. John, I'm gonna try.
My alter ego,
this
of
was
course,
all the
I'm
sort
everywhere.
of. Yeah, the theme of this was about displaced people, isn't that right?
Yes, yeah, we've had fantastic stories of displacement, or not fantastic. The stories aren't, but they've been told in a fantastic manner.
Yeah, I'll have to catch up. I'll have to catch up.
But yeah, it's definitely worth. It's a session definitely worth catching up on. Yeah. But and of course it'll be all the better for your contribution that's about to happen.
Okay, bear with me a wee second. I'm actually looking for the words of a song here. Believe it or not, I've written this song and I've recorded it last week. I still can't remember the words of it. So I'm going to, if you bear with me for a wee second, you'll remember the the images, the terrible images on the TV of the young Syrian boy about 5 years ago. The anniversary was just actually a couple of months ago there. And he was traveling from Syria through Turkey. His eventual goal, or his family's eventual goal, was to get to Canada. They had some family members in Canada, and anyway, my computer's still doing things here, John, that I'm not in control of. Anyway, the images were of this lovely little boy. Washed up on a beach in Turkey, and they were such harrowing images. I wrote this song, if I can find the thing. It's called Boat People, and it kind of it keeps repeating. All these stories keep coming on the news about these refugees coming from the Middle East and North Africa, and coming across the Channel, and trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea and so on. And it kind of brought me back to when I was a kid, and not really understanding what this was all about, and seeing these Vietnamese boat people, and what really wondering what that was all about. And anyway, I'm going to try and sing this song now, if I can find the words, which are here somewhere. Dear, dear. Oh my goodness, I'm not going to be able to find them. I'm going to try and sing the song without the aid of a safety net. I hope I can remember them. Like a message in a bottle, washed up on the sand. A little boy from Syria never made the promised land. Looks like he could be sleeping so peacefully he lay. Looks like one of my kids on a summer holiday. I pull my loved ones closer, way anxious parents do. I can watch the TV picture without the dread of deja vu. When I close my eyes and think of all that's gone before, I see a million desperate people making for a distant shore. I was too young in the 70s to understand why Vietnamese boat people were on the news at 10. The world has changed a lot since then. I find it hard to comprehend that boat people are on the news again. Way back in the olden days, they called in coffee tips, and they filled them to the gunnels. Irish immigrants, and for America, Canada they left, the hungry, the persecuted, poor and dispossessed. I was too young in the 70s to understand why Vietnamese boat people were on the news 10. The world has changed a lot since then, and I find it hard to comprehend that boat people are on the news again. Now they're drifting in the darkness, hearts beating in their throats. Their odds are 50-50 in a thing that barely floats. For the half who never make it, someone might say a prayer, but that little boy from Syria made the whole world stop and stare. I was too young in the 70s to understand why Vietnamese boat people were on the news 10. The World has changed a lot since then. I find it hard to comprehend that both people are on the news again. I didn't need the words after all.
No,
Nice one, Colin.
Thank you,
printed in your head
John,
like
for
the
having me.
picture. Well,
The
thank
truth
you.
is, both people have always, both people should be in the news, you know, until there are both people.
Until there are no more.
Until there are no more.
Yeah, but they keep being on the news, and nothing seems to be done about it, or nothing that kind of. I suppose there's always going to be refugees, there's always going to be warfare, and there's always going to be things. But a lot of that was from the perspective of the kid that I was at 10 or 11, looking at this and wondering why this was happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
That made I got Toby over Rob Rodin. But get getting I'll go Gale Gap but the a lot that oh my goodness not all is broken.
Your heart is broken, David. Yeah.
What I do, I go in gap. They're all my no more little. Oh, but the what I did is
Why are they there?
the not go out not the kids, but they can't do that right now. Oh, God.
But if we want a
God.
story, if we want stories of hope, what I sincerely recommend, and they come from everywhere, is that on Tuesdays, an hour earlier, at 5 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time, we have stories from children, and most of the stories are coming from children from Gaza, from the Gaza Strip. And I'm always amazed. There's just so much liveliness and hope and enthusiasm, and really, you know, that if people can, if children can live under those circumstances and still, I mean, they all started singing the other day, about 2 weeks ago, and someone sang "I Have a Dream" and just a cappella, and it was wonderful. So you know, but it's been a fantastic evening, David. I haven't forgotten that on the top of your bit of chat, you mentioned Kuli from who's an wonderful Indian poet with cerebral palsy, and who was on last night on the Worldwide Story, and she's a fantastic poet, and I in fact I will give her own little set at some point in January when I start programming next year, if she wants to do that. So I haven't forgotten that, but everyone will have to be patient till January, I'm afraid, because I'm pretty programmed up till then. I've just got odd bits to fill. I filled some of January with Para actually, but it's
I'm looking forward to that.
yeah.
I read a little bit I made story.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
thank you. Amazing stories tonight. And
Thanks.
thank you very much. Thank you, Paris. Thank you, Rain, who's disappeared. Colin, for that song to finish us on.
Good to see you,
Baden,
Colin.
with that incredibly wonderful personal poem. And Bob and David for joining us in the live room. Hopefully, lots of people outside the live room are watching this or can watch it on catch up. But it's been a real exploration of this
Good night.
theme. So thank you, everybody.
Okay,
Thank
John,
you for
And
putting
if
it-
I don't see you at all
putting
before,
it together
season's
and
greetings to
putting
you all.
us together.
Thank you, everybody.
nice to meet you, Paro. Good to see you again, Bob. See you soon, Colin.
Great to
John, I'm going to give you a call.
You're muted.
Adios.
You're muted,
David
Baden. You
will
can't
be-
insult me when you're muted.
David, we will be in touch.
You, no, John, I'm going to give you a call. Good to see you all.
Okay.
Take care. Night, night.
You're going to insult me in private then. Thank you.
David will be in touch. Okay.
Okay, and we'll stay in touch. And I'll put it on the site, but assure your publisher we are plugging the book. Thank you.
Paro, are you on Facebook?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
I've heard about this book. I'll have to look this book up.
And thank you, Ali, for driving the bus. I'll see you, Ali,
you,
tomorrow
Ali.
morning.
Yeah, John, you're welcome, my
Thank you.
friend.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's just afternoon in Morocco when I'll see you, but that's okay. But,
Yeah.
okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye,
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
Welcome,